it looked like for a while there, Nebraska was going to come back in that fourth set and take it. Had a couple opportunities at match point in the fourth set, but Oregon, give credit to the Ducks, they were able to fight off any Nebraska momentum and eventually took that fourth set 32-30. All right.
You got to remember, this is the same Oregon team that swept Stanford earlier in the season. Stanford's a 1 seed.
Stanford is a 1 seed.
Stanford won the Pac-12, and Oregon swept them earlier in the season. So these are no slouches. They had the fourth best offense in the nation. The Pac-12 freshman of the year, who, my goodness, did she have a game. Mimi Collier, 26 kills, 71 attempts, 8 errors. She hit 254 and also had 13 digs. So she's a true freshman playing all 6 rotations. It's impressive.
Yeah, it is. As always, 402-464-5685, the Honda Lincoln hotline, the Starter Heyman text line, both those open for you guys the entire show today, as well as the Starter Heyman Jewelers video stream, Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter. You guys can get incorporated into the show that way. Plenty of stuff to get to. We'll talk Husker volleyball. Husker basketball had a tough loss. Husker men's basketball, I should be specific, had a tough loss last night on the road at Indiana. They lose 81-66, I believe was or 65 was the final score on that one.
81-65.
81-65, a 16-point loss at Assembly Hall. Tough one. They lose Sam Griesel minutes before the match or before the game begins. We realized
send him back to the hotel.
Yeah, I realized that Sam Griesel was going to be inactive last night. So that's tough. And it really took a while for Nebraska's offense to get going and get into any sort of a rhythm last night, just because when you don't have Sam Griesel out there facilitating the rock, and also Sam provides the ability to kind of start backing down some guys in the paint and then kick it out, and Nebraska's offense can run that way. It was tough for Nebraska to generate any sort of offense. However, Husker women's hoops had a big win last night over Wisconsin. They handled the Badgers pretty easily last night through 4 quarters. So Rico is there, so we'll get his thoughts on that as well. But once again, Honda Lincoln hotline, Starter Heyman text line, 402-464-5685, the Honda Lincoln hotline, the Starter Heyman text line. Cubsker says this on the text line: I apologize, Husker Nation. I watched the volleyball match, and yet again, I jinxed the team. I still have officially never watched the volleyball team win while viewing, so feel free to place the blame on me.
Damn it, Cubsker.
Just like that.
You know better than that.
Don't watch.
How dare you?
Well, that's such a tough thing to do. Do you watch or do you not watch?
Just don't watch. Just get the updates.
Just get the updates
Just
from
get
Rico.
the updates from my Twitter.
Yeah, just give the updates from Rico. So Willie says this. We can talk Husker men's basketball here in the first segment. Then we'll kind of dive into in the second segment Husker women's hoops and then transfer portal stuff because there's some news there on some visits this weekend for Nebraska. There's a big one from Rhode Island. You might hear Rhode Island and go, ugh. But when I say it's an offensive lineman who allowed 1 sack in over 500 snaps last year, then you might be a little more interested. So men's basketball last night, Willie says this: I'm giving the hoops team a mulligan. Well, I think what was going to be so interesting this season, and I said this last night while I was kind of watching the highlights and getting updates from Twitter, is that this team is a program that might actually be able to compete with some guys. And they showed it last night. That's one of the more fascinating things as we go forward here, to see how this team responds to not only being competitive against some of the top teams in the country, but also being able to maybe squeak out some wins. Like Nebraska beats Creighton on Sunday, a team that nobody expected Nebraska to beat.
They were supposed to get run out of the gym.
They were supposed to, yeah. I mean, they were 14.5-point underdogs going into it, and Nebraska ends up beating them by 10. I mean, that's a 24-point differential compared to the spread, right? And what everybody else is expecting, what Vegas, the odd makers, are expecting. Mm-hmm. And so it was more interesting to see how they respond to it. And I'm not really sure how much stock we can put into last night when you don't have your senior point guard and one of your more veteran players on that team.
Yeah, you're missing your floor general. You're missing the guy who, when you do go on scoring droughts, you kind of get the ball to and let him go to work. And in place of him, they started Keisei Tominaga. And no offense to Keisei Tominaga, 6 versus 6 is a huge 6 foot versus 6'6" is a huge difference, especially on the defensive end of things. Where, I mean, they were playing tough defense still, but At least I didn't get to watch it, but from what I was hearing and what I was looking at via Twitter and what people were saying, they were playing tough defense. They were closing out on shooters, but Indiana was just hitting shots. And Trace Jackson Davis had himself a day, the third triple-double in Indiana history.
Yeah.
But when you're, I guess Casey wasn't running point guard. They had Emmanuel Bendabel running point guard. But when your floor general, your 6'6" guy who you kind of go to in times of crisis isn't out there, and you find out minutes before tip, that throws a wrench into your whole system, your whole operation. So I give him a little bit of a mulligan on this, especially considering it's a game of runs. There were multiple times Indiana goes on an 11-0 run. Nebraska answers with a 6-0, 8-0 run. They got to within single digits multiple times, and then when it came down to crunch time, they just didn't have that person that they could, go to, rely on, and just, I don't know, just give the ball to in crunch time.
And Matt says this, how is it a mulligan when they were competitive for 80% of the game without their only point guard who happens to also be your second best player? And by the way, that's also on the road against the top 15 team. Maybe mulligan's the wrong word because, Matt, you're right. But maybe that's kind of what we're getting at is you put, I suppose to a certain extent, you put a little bit of stock into last night's game because you were able to stay competitive for 80% of the game, but you don't know that unless you kind of watch the game, I suppose. And
if you look at the final score,
if you watch the game unfold, you would know that Nebraska was down like 17-5.
They were down 22 at one point.
Yeah, like they were down big early on because the rhythm, it struggled. They struggled to get into any sort of rhythm on offense. They didn't shoot the three ball well. CJ Wilcher, once again, we've talked about one of the biggest differences from this team is that they're balanced. They have multiple guys that might go off every other night, where CJ Wilcher had a tough night against Creighton shooting the basketball, but last night he's your leading scorer. He stepped up when Sam Griesel was out. And Derek Walker had a really good game against Creighton, but he didn't struggle last night necessarily, but he went up against a better rim protecting team in Indiana. If you look at Indiana's, they protect the rim. They're the third best team at protecting the rim in percentages wise across the entire country. So having Trace Jackson Davis, having Race Thompson, those two guys down there in the paint kind of protecting the rim, it's a lot tougher statistically to score buckets near or at the basket against Indiana than it was against Creighton. That's just speaking from statistics.
Mm-hmm.
And Derek Walker made Kalkbrenner look like smooth as butter, like it was easy, like a baby, on Sunday. And Trace Jackson Davis is a much better player than Ryan Kalkbrenner right now.
Trace Jackson Davis, more physical than Kalkbrenner.
Had a triple-double as well last night.
Kalkbrenner probably more, not athletic. I don't know. Skilled?
Potential?
Sure.
How about potential?
Trace Jackson Davis, just tougher. He's a Big Ten big.
He's ready. So anyway, put some stock into it because Nebraska, considering the circumstances, played well enough to stay competitive in that game. And that's why I guess when we opened this segment, I was like, listen, Nebraska, it's going to be interesting to see how they respond to winning against Creighton, then losing against a top 10 team or top 15 team, I guess, last night in Indiana, who lost at the rack against Rutgers, which, by the way, rack is a very difficult place to play. It's not the rack anymore.
They called it something else.
It is, but it's something new. But it's the rack.
Rutgers Athletic Complex.
They call it the rack on the broadcast last night.
Oh, okay, then it's still the rack.
So it's still the rack. But anyway, they lost at Rutgers, which is a tough place to play. And Rutgers also has had Indiana's number the last couple seasons. If you look at that, Indiana struggled to beat the Scarlet Knights. However, now Nebraska gets another opportunity. Here they are against top 5 Purdue. 4th ranked Purdue comes into PBA and into Lincoln on Saturday. That game, I believe, is at 1:15 p.m. is when tip-off is. It's a doubleheader of Husker men's basketball in the afternoon, and then Husker women's basketball hosts Samford at 7 p.m. that night. So if you want to just stick around for a little double hoops action, you're more than welcome to, obviously, at Pinnacle Bank Arena. But here we go. I mean,
Derek Walker, no time off.
You're starting to enter the gauntlet. Yeah, no time off. You have Kalkbrenner, Trace Jackson Davis, and then Zach Edey now. So
it only gets harder.
Nebraska will have kind of a small, not break or a bye game in there, but it's a game against Queens, who is a new Division I team.
They're like 7-2
from North Carolina
in their first season in D1.
Yeah, that'll be in the Battle of the Vault, and then it's right back to Big Ten play the following games, and you're into that gauntlet that is the Big Ten Conference. So something that Nebraska's just going to kind of have to keep in mind down the road, and Nebraska will, try to navigate their way through the grueling schedule. But all right, let's go ahead and take a break. When we come back, let's talk a little bit of transfer portal stuff. I'll have to bounce out of here a little bit earlier since it is a Thursday for the final time this semester.
He's got to go to class. He's
final
a youngin'.
time. It's the final time this semester, so we're okay. But I got to go do a final presentation at 2:00. But anyway,
right.
Let's go ahead and go to break. When we come back, we talk transfer portal, talk about the visits of guys. Also, a very interesting and newly relevant program just paid Malachi Coleman a visit. We'll tell you who it is after the break on the Happy Hour.